It's accurate to say it's about to explode. Japan will deploy surface-to-air missiles on Yonaguni Island near Taiwan, prompting China to protest with military demonstrations and increased live-fire drills. Let's dive into this topic now. I'll show you. After Prime Minister Takachi of Japan suggested possible intervention in a Taiwan emergency, Japan-China relations have quickly worsened. However, there are concerns the conflict could escalate into violence. Our defense minister, Funkle Sekja Koizubi Shimjiro, who became Japan's defense minister, visited Yonaguni Island, which is located right in front of Taiwan. He stressed the plan to deploy surface-to-air missiles on Yonaguni Island, which is just 110 kilometers from Taiwan. If China invades Taiwan, Yonaguni Island can offer support most quickly. Koizubi Shimjiro visited the island. The Japanese defense minister stated that this missile deployment could help lower the possibility of an armed attack against our country. He also highlighted the deployment of Kongsamsik medium-range surface-to-air missiles. Reporters asked if this place could trigger armed conflict with China. He argued that deploying troops would not escalate regional tensions. Yonaguni Island already has surveillance radars monitoring the sea and sky, plus an electronic warfare unit that disrupts enemy communications and guidance. In particular, Japan believes that this area will be the most important in the event of an invasion of Taiwan and has recently been conducting more intensive training. Plans are underway to deploy an anti-air electronic warfare unit to disrupt enemy aircraft radar by 2026. Next year, Japan will start building shelters for long-term stays in case of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. And above all, it is known that they have also started planning to evacuate local residents in the event of a Taiwan invasion. A recent Bloomberg report says they've trained in transporting supplies from Okinawa to Yonaguni in recent weeks. Bloomberg also analyzed that it seems they simulated a situation of creating a forward operating base. Japan deployed surface-to-air missile launchers in that situation, and China is understandably furious. China has held ongoing live-fire drills in the West Sea, demonstrating its military readiness, including exercises through Fujian. They also released a video saying, "If a battle breaks out today, this is my answer," showing their combat readiness. But at the same time, China has also been conducting drills near areas close to Korea's exclusive economic zone. When asked about Japan's missile deployment, the Chinese Ministry of Defense spokesperson responded. He warned that if Japan crosses the line and causes disaster, it will pay a heavy price. Chinese state media and government spokespersons are showing a very furious attitude and are intensifying their attacks on Japan. China's state-run media, Huanggu Sibo, also released a commentary saying that this is summoning the specter and ghost of militarism that had been quiet for a long time. It pointed out that countries around the world, especially neighboring Asian countries, should be on guard together against the extreme dangers of Japan's new form of militarism, which it called a toxic new sprout. Russia is joining in too. The Russian Foreign Ministry accused Japan of sending lethal weapons as part of wider military actions and criticized Tokyo for following United States orders. At the same time, Russia showed a wary attitude toward Japan, saying it shares a similar position with China. It also announced that it would respond strongly to this. Japan faces mounting pressure from China and Russia. The problem is, the United States appears to just watch this situation. A Wall Street report says that on November 26th, President Trump told Prime Minister Takaichi in a call to tone down comments about Taiwan. Amid the conflict between Japan and China, sparked by Prime Minister Takaichi's remarks about a crisis threatening Japan's survival in the event of a Taiwan emergency, the United States seems to be refraining from openly supporting its ally, Japan. President Xi Jinping reportedly called President Trump for 30 minutes to express anger over Prime Minister Takaichi's remarks, and Trump relayed this to Takaichi. This has led to rising unease in Japan. Chief Cabinet Secretary Dara declined to discuss the call's details about the media reports. He explained that while there was advice from President Trump not to provoke the Chinese government over the issue of Taiwan's sovereignty, it was not a request for restraint. However, according to reports from the Asahi Shimbun and other Japanese domestic media, Japanese government officials have expressed concerns that if the situation worsens, the strong Japan-United States relationship built since the Shinzo Abe administration could collapse. Though Prime Minister Takaichi's support is strong, the Nikkei reported concerns that Japan and China may struggle to compromise, possibly prolonging the conflict. Currently, the United States appears to prioritize the alliance, but its actions suggest a retreat. The United States continues to say that its allies are even worse than China or Russia, calling them greedy countries, and insists that they should fulfill their obligations as allies. Since the Trump administration took office, this is the area where the United States has changed the most compared to before. This change is also what the Japanese government is most anxious about. The Trump administration is prioritizing costs and assigning more responsibility to its allies. Within the United States, there are growing voices questioning why American young people should be dragged into conflicts in Asia, and President Trump is also using that sentiment as political capital. As this trend intensifies, Japan has no choice but to move toward expanding the role of the self-defense forces, strengthening weapons deployment, and securing its own deterrence capability. The United States knows this. That's why President Trump told Prime Minister Decalchi to tone down his remarks about Taiwan, but hasn't clarified the scope of United States-Japan alliance involvement. Japan wants a clear United States commitment to intervene in an emergency, but the United States is purposely avoiding such a statement. This is a stronger form of strategic ambiguity and the most practical approach the United States has taken on the Taiwan issue. A direct conflict with China is the worst-case scenario for the United States due to deep economic ties and military challenges. So the United States needs to keep China in check while avoiding an all-out war. In this situation, it's very advantageous for the United States if Japan takes on the role of a forward-deployed force. If Japan engages China on the front lines, the United States can hold the East Asian front with fewer resources. Japan is building up its military infrastructure, maintaining a hardline stance of not getting closer to China, and actively sending messages and playing a role that it will intervene in the event of a Taiwan contingency. The United States is watching this and is taking a direction of providing only the minimum necessary delay. The United States now seems to be making a calculated retreat, not acting out of indifference. This puts two kinds of pressure on Japan. Japan must now make larger military decisions to match the United States' retreat, increasing Japan's risk of direct conflict with China. In fact, if this happens, Japan has no choice but to transition into a normal country. I even think that maybe the United States and Japan are aiming for this right now. As China's pressure intensifies, Japan is increasingly moving to replace the self-defense forces with a national defense force. So I can't help but think that maybe they're intentionally exposing these things through the media. Currently, Prime Minister Decalchi's approval rating continues to soar. In a recent 3KFNN joint poll, he recorded an approval rating of 75.2%. In Japanese political history, it's not uncommon for a prime minister to have an approval rating of 70% right after taking office. Since approval ratings usually fall below 50% within 4 months, Prime Minister Decalchi's remains unusually high among political circles. Currently, there's a fandom phenomenon around Prime Minister Decalchi, especially on Japanese social media. With his clear language and strong performances, he is receiving great support from the younger generation. As a result, Prime Minister Decalchi's approval rating is on the rise. Many experts believe that Japan's actions will only become more hardline, not softer. South Korea is simply observing this situation without saying anything. Strangely, since Japan and China are fighting each other, it's interesting that South Korea is showing a friendly attitude to save its allies. After Prime Minister Decalchi claimed Dokdo belongs to Japan, China firmly asserted it belongs to South Korea. China appears intent on fueling South Korea-Japan conflicts to disrupt their cooperation. In response, Japan insisted that cooperation between South Korea and Japan should be strengthened and announced its policy not to repeat the nightmares of the past. At the same time, Prime Minister Decalchi directly praised President Lee Jae-myung, mentioning that he got the impression that he is a leader who can share a sense of concern about issues in the current international situation. However, South Korea remains quiet. South Korea's quiet attitude is a choice to manage the situation carefully, and it also reflects a calculation to avoid unnecessary sparks between the surrounding major powers. However, as the situation in East Asia is rapidly changing, external attention towards South Korea is actually becoming even stronger. Japan has recently focused on cooperating with South Korea. They are leaving behind past tensions and now openly discussing the need for cooperation. The reason Japan has changed like this is to keep China in check. Because Yonagun's remarks about missile deployment and intervention in a Taiwan contingency show that Japan's actions are openly directed at China, Japan desperately needs support from neighboring countries. Among them, Korea is a decisive factor when it comes to putting pressure on China. China is most sensitive to the Korean Navy's range, United States forces strategic value in Korea, and Korea, United States-Japan information sharing. That's why Japan aims to reduce conflicts with Korea and limit China's strategic space. From China's perspective, this trend is the most threatening. If South Korea, the United States, and Japan become a solid bloc, China will be pressured in both the East China Sea and the Yellow Sea at the same time. That's why China began sending friendly messages to Korea when its conflict with Japan peaked. As Korea and Japan strengthen cooperation, China faces a broader front and thus seeks to create divisions. For Korea, this is both an opportunity and a burden. If Korea-Japan cooperation is strengthened, Korea's diplomatic space will expand, and there will be the advantage of being able to expect support from the United States. But at the same time, the structure in which Korea is forced to make strategic choices between two major powers, China and Japan, will be strengthened. China works to prevent Korea from aligning with the United States and Japan, while Japan draws Korea closer to counter China. Here, Korea's main concern is maintaining balance, not choosing sides. The strange turbulence happening around Korea right now is not about emotional reconciliation, but rather the result of geopolitical pressure from continental and maritime powers, both trying to bring Korea to their side. Therefore, depending on what choice Korea makes, the nature of the conflict between Japan and China is also likely to change to some extent. Korea may stay neutral for now. What are your thoughts on the situation? Share in the comments. That's all for this video. Thank you.